I think I just made it before 8 o'clock. I seem to be getting a little bit better at being on time after my break. How are you guys doing? Jean Caris, is it Jean or Jean? So many different possibilities pronunciation-wise if you, from my neck of the woods. Stephanie says this will be an interesting analysis. I hope so. Let's just bring you guys up. In the meantime, Timmy is doing his usual thing. He wants attention now that he knows he can't really get too much attention. Timmy, say hello. Come, Timmy. Oh. So the subject of today's conversation is unequally yoked, right? Do you guys know what that means? Female pronunciation, JC. Jean, okay, Jean. Marianne DeWitt, greetings from Monaco. Wow, I've always wanted to go to Monaco. I had a girlfriend who once went to Monaco and then I went somewhere else. And I guess that was the closest I got to going to Monaco. Kimberly Faith, hi there. Yonos Modesto, okay, hi there. Nan Sullivan, Bria Lace, interesting topic. Sally Vela, mismatched. But for quite a long time, they apparently weren't, right? For quite a long time, they were this kind of perfect couple, weren't they? Hi, Steph. Hi, Daniel Donovan. The question was, are Suzanne and Barry Morphew unequally yoked, or were they? Susie G, hi there. What means yoked? I'll tell you about that in a moment. I think the quick answer is if you imagine two cows or oxen in the old days and they put something over them and then that thing that held them in the same place, if they were pulling something, that was the yoke. But I'll kind of get to that. I'll get to that. If you're unequally yoked, it means the one animal is putting a greater burden, or the one animal is stronger than the other one. Can you see Timmy? He just wants to monopolize attention, as usual. I think if I just pull it down like that, that might work a bit better. Okay. Hey, Timmy. Hey. Whenever I kind of get dressed, Timmy starts going for my shoes and whatever. I think he's figured out that means he's either going to be abandoned or he's going to go somewhere. So it is a biblical reference. That's why I'm using it. Yoked only makes me think of plowing horses. Okay, interesting. It's really just the apparatus used on beasts of burden, whether it's a donkey, if it's cattle. Sometimes oxen are used to pull wagons in the old days, but that's really what it's all about. Timmy, hey, people want to see you, Timmy. Don't fall asleep now. It's used to represent a lot of different meaning of one side and not the other. When is Timmy's first book coming out? Timmy? Might be a while. Yeah, good to see all the familiar names here. Kimberly Faith. Okay, so being unequally yoked in the contemporary biblical sense, which is kind of oxymoron because contemporary and biblical, a little bit different. But in the way that most of us understand, it means your marriage and relationship is doomed for disaster. It's a catchy truism because it is true. The origin of this epithet is commonly thought to be the Christian Bible, with one of the oldest surviving recorded references to this unusual yoking business going all the way back to a papyrus, or Papyrus 46, from approximately 175 AD. So this idea has been with us from ancient times, and it's stood the test of time. I think it's a truism because it's true. But the Bible doesn't actually have the monopoly over the idea, even if it has monopolized the phrase over the centuries. Unequal yoking is rooted in the rise of agrarian societies about 10,000 years ago. Farming was a relatively new idea then. Think about farming as, wow, maybe we should try doing this as a way of earning a living as opposed to surviving off the land. Like the wheel, and our ancestors were amateurs at pretty much everything. So at that time, if it was something that you might think, well, we'll just put these two animals here and they can work for us. If you're an amateur farmer, you were likely to make that mistake. Obviously, unequal yoking hurts both animals. It hurts the stronger animal and it hurts the weak animal, right? You might think it just hurts the weak animal, but it basically causes a strain and tension on the yoke itself, but on both animals. So people had to be told not to yoke strong animals like an ox, say, with smaller, weaker beasts of burden like donkeys. So that's the other part, is you might have poor peasants, and they might yoke two totally different animals to one another, and of course that's a recipe for disaster, because their gaits would be out of sync. The proportions of their bodies wouldn't work in terms of shouldering the yoke and all that kind of thing. I think I've put a link in the description and to this video, so you can probably watch another video I've done where you actually see pictures of a yoke and you kind of get a sense of what it's all about. Over time, these prescripts achieved a symbolic importance and went from applying to effective farm animal management to marriage advice. The reasoning was sound. Having a strong person, such as someone with a strong faith in God, married to a weak person, such as an unbeliever, was likely to cause your relationship to go around in circles and potentially unravel completely. While one can debate whether believers or unbelievers are stronger or weaker relative to one another, what's clear is the principle itself is sound. People who are strikingly different to one another, especially in their beliefs and orientations, aren't likely to maintain strong relationships. Happy with that? So that's just a general kind of summary of what we're talking about. I think it was October 2018, so about a little bit more than 3 years ago, I took this concept and applied it to the Watts family. And some people found that quite interesting. I wrote a blog post about it and then later made a video. In this episode, we're obviously going to apply it to the Morphews, and I've made a couple of post-its just to separate each kind of section from the next. So when I kind of go like that, it's really just we're going to go into the next area. Okay. So we are going to deal with 7 separate areas. Some of them kind of interlap or overlap, and this is still quite early on in the case. We don't know an incredible amount of, for example, Suzanne's backstory, right? We've starting to figure out a little bit about Barry's as the baseball star and quite a man's man kind of thing. I feel like a little bit less is known about Suzanne, but I think we know enough. I think the other thing to mention is if we compare, and this is a question I want to ask you guys, do you think Shan'ann and Chris Watts, their marriage, the yoking of their marriage, do you think that was more unequal than Barry Morphew and Suzanne Morphew? What do you guys think about that? So in other words, if you compare the Watts family, the Watts marriage, to the Morphew family, the Morphew marriage, do you think there was more unequal yoking in the one or the other? What do you think? It's definitely quite a tough question, and I actually think I saw it, someone kind of bring it up, and I thought it was definitely quite an interesting concept. What do you guys think? Do you think Barry and Suzanne were more unequally yoked, or what? What's your? So Sailor Moonbeam says somewhat more. Interesting. More in the Watts, in spite of because of. Nan Sullivan, don't know. Kuka, the Watts more unequally yoked. Debbie McClellan, pretty much the same. Kimberly Faith is thinking about it. Tiffy Richardson, probably the same, although different. Carol Field, no, I wouldn't say about the same. Shan'ann, so of course we've got the advantage with the Watts family of getting inside the home through all of that social media, through all of those videos Shan'ann took of herself. We got a real vibe for what Shan'ann is like, certainly on camera. I don't think that's the real Shan'ann, but it's certainly giving you a clue, giving you a couple of pointers to the real Shan'ann, and then you would get even less of Chris Watts. I also don't think the real Chris Watts is the Chris Watts we heard and to some extent saw in some of those interviews, but it is giving you a sense through his tone of voice and some of his mannerisms what kind of guy he is. In the same way that the Sermon on the Porch, I don't think is the real Chris Watts, it's his mask that he's wearing, right? But we have very little mask or otherwise to go on in the Morphew case. Gigi Jardine says, I thought money was involved all along. Carol says, I even think the picture of Barry and Suzanne show who was the dominant one. That's quite an interesting point. I think sometimes you can see certain things at face value. I definitely think that is the case sometimes. Of course, sometimes people flatter to deceive in their self-portraits. Candy Princeton, 4:11 in the morning here. Good morning. Are you in Australia or New Zealand? Ian Kelly, opposites attract. So the first question that I want to ask and answer, I think there's a question mark under the title of this video, and it is, well, were they even unequally yoked? So let me just put that out there. If you think they were unequally yoked, put down a 1. If you think actually that's irrelevant, they weren't unequally yoked, they were actually quite a good couple and something else was happening, put a 2. Let's hear what you guys say about that. Big Jim, thanks for the compliment. Been mountain biking, so I'm feeling quite good about that. Everyone is saying 1 so far, very unequally yoked. I'm not, are you talking about the Morphews? Shan'ann was Italian, Chris primarily. So everyone is saying 1. Daniel says Barry never deserved a woman so beautiful. Okay, so I agree with all of you saying 1, that there definitely was unequal yoking. Otherwise, I don't think the crime would have happened. I don't think what happened to Suzanne would have happened if there wasn't unequal yoking, right? I just want to put a disclaimer here again, just for the legal aspect. Barry is innocent until proven guilty. What we're doing is speculating, and we're speculating specifically on their marriage. That's really all we're sort of looking at. And the first point that I want to, Ken Dalton, from Ireland. There are quite a few guys in this chat. I'm used to it just being ladies. It's good to see quite a few guys here as well. I also find it quite interesting how other women perceive other women in terms of mistresses in this case as well. And in the Watts case, I think if you really want a balanced view, you need to, women need to ask other women, but also other men. I think other men are also going to give you a view. You might not like it, but it will certainly perhaps challenge what you think. Someone was making the case that when men cheat, they don't cheat with someone who's more attractive. I think what a lot of people are getting stuck on is more attractive doesn't necessarily mean more physically beautiful. I get that is probably the conventional meaning, but it doesn't really boil down to just that. But I do think even on that topic, if you're a woman and you're following some of these cases, ask your husband, ask your boyfriend, ask a guy who they think is more attractive in a particular thing. But attractive really is about physical appearance, but also personality and also just, I guess, chemistry. And it's basically someone you find more desirable. Now, someone else might not. If you take Prince Charles and who he found more attractive in terms of his affair, it's something else, right? Someone else has beauty in the eye of the beholder, but I don't want to dismiss the importance of the attractiveness, the physical attractiveness of somebody else. I'm frankly quite surprised that some people have said certain things, but everyone's allowed their opinion. Teresa Moore just got here. Greetings from Canada. Teresa, you're just in time because we're about to go into sort of the thick of it. So we're going to start with the first thing that we used to sort of establish whether there was unequal yoking and the degree of it, and that is personality. Can you see that? I don't know if it's very clear. Anyway, I just want to make sure that this is the introduction to the first thing. And we have already gotten a sense from quite a distance away that there feels like there's a difference between Barry's personality and Suzanne's personality, right? We've heard quite a few people talking about that. Again, bringing it back to Chris Watts, you have exactly the same thing. You have a dominant personality and a passive personality. And what stands out with the Chris Watts case is the degree to which Chris Watts was passive and the degree to which Shan'ann Watts was dominant. And I know a lot of people don't like to talk about this. Some people want to be on that one side or whatever. But I think it's fair to say that Chris Watts was unusually passive. He was more passive, so if you had to say, well, he's an introvert and he's reserved, well, not just a little bit introverted, very introverted, not just a little bit reserved, very reserved, not just a little bit passive, but very passive. And what can happen in a passive scenario is the passive person kind of gets used to either being controlled or pushed around or manipulated or playing second fiddle. They kind of get used to that role. I'm not saying they get used to it in the sense that they are happy with it, just that they sort of figure out, well, I guess this is my role and this is what I need to do to avoid conflict. And this is how I need to toe the line with that and that and that. And these are the eggshells I need to walk on, right? So I'm not saying the passive person is happily passive, but they can become more and more passive, especially if the dominant person becomes more and more dominant and more controlling. And I don't know whether that isn't necessarily going to happen with age. I think if you're a very, very dominant person and a very, very passive person, with age, it is likely to just keep going in those directions, unless there's some intervention. So you have this the strange inversion with the Watts family, where the wife, the woman, the female spouse in that dynamic is dominant, which I think is fairly unusual. And then the passive other half is the husband, which is, I think, is also fairly unusual. Timmy's scrolling, hey, right? And with the Morphew case, you kind of have the conventional dynamic, which is when it happens. I'm just saying, when you have dominant and passive, I think it's conventionally the man being dominant and the woman being passive. I could be wrong. If I think about my own parents, I think my mother, I almost stuttered there. My mother was pretty, both my parents, I think, are quite controlling personalities, but I think because my mother was such a dominant perfectionist, my father's quite a passive figure, although he's not a passive person, but in terms of the relationship, he's quite passive. But I think the conventional scenario is that the male in marriages tends to be quite dominant and the woman passive. But I think that's changing as well. I think that's also changing. That's also relevant to my age, and I think it's relative to where you live in the world. I think it's relative to quite a lot of things. But I do think a lot of people looked at the Chris Watts case and thought, that's a bit strange, what's going on there. He hands over his paycheck. But I've listed personality as number one because I think, Timmy, stop it. Sorry, he's kind of actually literally tapping on my keyboard. Anyway, I've listed personality as number one because it is so important. You can get along very well with another personality, and then something can change, and then you have a personality clash. And think about just how the macro situation has been changing in the world, where if you can't express yourself well on social media, if you can't deal with conflict very well on social media, if you can't communicate very well on social media, how's that going to reflect on the one person? And I think social media is another potential problem with couples that is quite difficult to navigate. Do you have the same attitude to social media? Do you have the same attitude to your privacy? Do you have the same attitude to wanting to share everything? And I think if your personality isn't the same on that, it can also lead to a lot of difficulty. I don't think that was such a big issue in the Morphew case, but think about it in the Chris Watts case, where Chris Watts didn't really want to be on social media. He wasn't really participating, and his wife was actually running his Facebook account. I don't think she wanted to, but just think about that in terms of control. Would you want someone in control of your profile posting things on your behalf? I certainly wouldn't want that. Mystic Firefly says, I am an alpha female. Anne Lane says, greed. So, that is the next thing I want to get into, is finances. I'm just wondering whether I've touched on everything that I'm meant to on personality. I think it's probably important to be explicit about Barry and Suzanne's personality. I think we've sort of just glossed over it in a way. So I think it's important to be quite explicit what we're talking about. And what we're talking about is, we've heard that Suzanne is nice and sweet and the kindest person you've ever met. We haven't heard a video of her, so we can't kind of get a sense of how soft-spoken she is, but you kind of get a sense that she steps back for her husband, that she's the softer side of Barry's, of that marriage. She's if Barry is rough around the edges, then she's softer. And we're going to get to more of that dealing with the personality. Today I was trying to think in a intuitive way, but also in an experiential way, what I could contribute to guys in terms of the personality of a dominant person who's got sport in his background, but is perhaps struggling in terms of his work, in terms of that status aspect. Heather West, thanks very much. Heather West, you're such a you're very consistent. You're on almost every live, so it was good to see you here again. I'm just going to kind of cut to the chase. Some of the most so again, dealing with this personality aspect. Another creator actually contacted me. In fact, I think she said something on Twitter, just saying this is so clear that they were unequally yoked, especially in the biblical sense, because of the Christian aspect in this family, right? Because they were ostensibly a Christian family. They came from kind of Christian roots in Indiana, and some of my patrons were trying to find out which church they went to, and there were just so many churches in a small little town. But this whole idea of unequal yoking is a very Christian concept. And I do think it is even more applicable when you're dealing with Christians. So I think when at least one person in a marriage is a Christian, the concept of yoking is going to be really uppermost in that person's mind, right? It doesn't really matter if one person's a Christian or both, but the yoking is going to be something that is going to be coming up again and again. And what is interesting with this creator, who I know she's quite a strong believer herself, she often puts up Bible verses. For her, this is a really good topic because it is so clear that in terms of their religion, or I don't even want to use that word, in terms of their Christianity, the yoking had to be totally different. So spiritually speaking, the yoking would be totally different. Meaning, and this I think tells you something about the personality that we're talking about, meaning Suzanne is a genuine, kind, genuine, sweet person, a genuinely nice person. I think it's one of the reasons why this case has got so much traction is some people were genuinely shocked that this would happen to her. I think there are other factors as well, such as it being in Colorado, and I think the couple are quite an attractive kind of middle-class couple in a sense. I think that's a factor as well. But I think she was a genuine Christian, and I don't know if Barry was. I think Barry was playing the role of the genuine Christian dad. And there's a photo I've been using quite often on in some of my videos where it looks like Barry's sitting in the lounge reading from a Bible. I don't know if it's the Bible. It looks like it's a book. Looks like a blackish book or a notebook. It could be not be a Bible, but it looks like a Bible just based on how the cover sort of goes. In any event, the point that I'm trying to make is that the impression I get is, in terms of their beliefs, they were very unequally yoked. In terms of their beliefs, in terms of what Suzanne believed and lived out in a genuine way, they were very unequal. And I think I meant to address this question in the beginning, but the fact that a crime happened here, the fact that a murder was committed, the fact that I don't think the crime would have happened if there wasn't unequal yoking. I really don't think so. So I think that in a way is like a reverse way of looking at it, is that the yoking is probably why the crime happened. Now we've got to determine, how did this yoking actually burden the one more than the other, right? And so coming back to this point, I was at school, I was also at school I was at an all boys school, and there was some of the sportsmen at the school were legends. They were kind of famous, and they went on to become nationally, some of them internationally famous. But what I'll never forget when I was at school was the extent of the hypocrisy. You'd have a kid in your class who the teachers thought was awesome, and he was a certain way. So with the guys he was a certain way, and then when he was with a girl or in a church scenario, it would be totally different. And I was shocked at the ease at which these young men could go from being kind of a-hole, basically just a full of himself jerk, to being the sweetest, gentlemanly Christian that you can imagine. And it was the seamless transition from someone who would cuss and just be, I don't know, just a certain way. And then, all this bravado, all this machismo, all this toxic masculinity, and go from that to this perfect gentleman in like the blink of an eye. And as I say, the transition from the one to the other, it was incredible. It was bewildering. And these young men had developed this talent as teenagers, right? And part of it was being the star at school, being the rugby star or whatever star, and already having that kind of celebrity status, and already being a total two-face about it, with the guys being whatever way, and then with somebody else being completely different. And what do you call someone like that? It's a hypocrite. It's someone who pretends to be one way and then they're another way. And, one of the things I've always said is, in order for crimes to happen, like murder, all murderers are liars. And that lying starts in a sort of a normal fashion. And something I meant to communicate with you guys at the beginning, but we kind of got into this quite quickly, is we come to the crime at the end of it, and because of the fragmented way that we think, we tend to just snap our fingers and say, oh, I think this happened and that happened. He just snapped, or something like that. Yes, glorifying athletes. What we don't tend to recognize, and it's because of the society we live in, because of the instant nature of our society, because of so many things that are instantaneous. You press a button and a television channel comes on. You press another button and it changes. You turn the ignition on and you drive your vehicle. You participate in none of those processes. You just inherit them. You go to your supermarket and you buy something. You don't see the process involved in planting, growing, harvesting, or transporting that stuff, right? And as a result, that's just one example. There are many examples. For example, your phone or a computer or the internet, you don't see how all of those processes are built and designed and integrated and modified and upgraded, how the software comes together. You just don't see it. All you do is you the end user, and you expect it to work, right? Now, if you take that concept of just fragmented thinking and thinking in the end zone, and you just reverse it and you say something like what happens in a relationship where someone's unequally yoked doesn't just happen. You don't just get married and suddenly you're unequally yoked. Something like that, what happens is things evolve, processes develop. As these things evolve and develop, as these processes become more complicated, you also have escalating tensions, escalating complexity, things that are driving whatever the dynamic is tend to change in certain ways as well. And these things build up over time. And that's the part you've got to appreciate. In the same way that you can yoke two animals unequally and they'll be fine in the beginning, right? You can have two dogs pulling a sleigh, two donkeys or whatever. But if one of them is injured, or one of them, you didn't know this, is a lot older than the other one, or the one is pregnant, but the other one isn't, or whatever. the one has got a thorn in its foot, you're going to know about those things much later on. And if you push it when you shouldn't be, then those processes are going to start embedding into the system, and it's going to become worse and worse and worse, right? Does it make sense? It's going to escalate. Now, something like a thorn in the foot in the beginning isn't a big deal. I've actually got, I think, a piece of a shell fragment in the side of my foot from the holiday I was on, and I think it's not infected, but I think it's definitely still in there. And so over time, it can really become a problem. We're going to talk about cancer in a moment, but cancer is something that can develop like that as well. As you don't just wake up one day and you've got cancer. You've been living a lifestyle for a certain length of time. Sometimes it can happen that way, but often it's due to living a lifestyle a certain way, not exercising as much as you know you should be, and all of that kind of thing, right? All I'm trying to say is something like a personality where there's a difference, one's dominant and controlling, the other one's passive. You might say that's not a big deal, and it might not be a big deal for the first 5 years. It might not be a big deal for the next 5 years. But what I think I can see into this particular case is Barry was a baseball star. And that was a big deal when he was in high school. And maybe that carried him through for maybe the next 10 years. But at some point, I think following his father's death, and at some point, as he was passing his 40s and approaching his 50s, I wonder whether he didn't kind of pine for those glory days when not only was he physically this legend and the specimen to be admired, but also the girls, he always had a girl in his arm. And that's something Chris McDonough also mentioned, I think, in his video, just saying, you know, he would cruise the streets and he always had a girl on his arm kind of thing. And when he's in Colorado and his wife has cancer, or his wife is at home, or his wife is not very happy where she is, he may have feelings of, but remember who I was. I want to be that guy again. Something like that. And of course, the Christianity is not going to permit that. The Christianity is basically going to say, no, be a faithful husband. No, come home. No, don't not turn the other cheek. Don't look towards someone else's cheek, kind of thing. Stephanie, I see there one or two people bickering on the chat. I don't really want the chat to be about personal things, so I think maybe just get rid of both of them. I don't really want people on here that are talking about what they're talking about. Okay. I just have a zero tolerance for that kind of thing. We're talking about quite important stuff here, and this isn't kindergarten. Okay, so we've spoken about personality, and the part I'm trying to emphasize just as a conclusion to that topic is people who were stars in high school and maybe a little bit beyond maybe have an unrealistic ego and an unrealistic sense of who they are for the rest of their lives. And part of their dominant personalities, which came across in their sport, I mean, that's why they became good, you know, in their sport. You know, I think you need to be a particular kind of personality to excel at sport. You need to be ambitious. You need to be determined. You need to have that testosterone. You need to, you know, crush a few skulls kind of thing. I'm talking about in the football sense. You need that kind of aggression. But then what happens when you're married? What do you do with that aggression? What happens, right? So I'm just saying I noticed incredible hypocrisy with the legends that I saw who You saw them, and some guys admired them, and then when they were at a dance or they were in church, they were suddenly the sweetest men you've ever seen, and you're just like, wow. I wonder how long it's going to take for someone to figure this part out, kind of thing. Anyway, that is the personality aspect, and I've got a feeling that Suzanne may have wanted to leave Barry. That's the feeling I get. In the same way that Chris Watts was the passive one in the Watts case, he actually wanted to leave, but he didn't know how. I kind of get the feeling that Suzanne wanted to leave him, that Suzanne had started feeling, I'm not happy with what's going on here, and I'm not happy in Colorado, and she didn't want to be in the marriage. That's the feeling I get. And there's certain circumstantial evidence that sort of supports that. Some of it is that they had an argument, but I think it kind of goes beyond that. I don't really want to go into it too much here because we don't know so much. And I think what's going to be very interesting is what the texts reveal, presuming there's a phone data review that one can rely on. I think that's going to be quite interesting. Okay, so let's go from personality to finances, right? So this is just the next thing. You've actually got to take that personality aspect into the finances as well. So in the Chris Watts case, John, they lived in Colorado for 2 years. She was definitely becoming more vulnerable with the cancer coming back and possible financial trouble. Lisbeth says, I think Suzanne put her foot down in some way, maybe regarding money. I think that's a great point. Suzanne Gamble, right, I think dominance was definitely a sport for Mr. Barry, and Suzanne had enough. The children will know probably about that. The children will probably have experienced that dynamic and had a view on it either way. Someone called Beckers says he probably was mad about all the medical bills. Corin Levi, oh no, late again. Well, it's good that you're here. Living life in Hawaii, money. Well, I see your, okay, there it is. Jukes, Suzanne cared about others. Barry had become, and she'd become fearful of him. Okay, so now we're going to deal a little bit about the money side. So that's one of the best ways to illustrate being unequally yoked is the money. You can either say that one person is earning all the money and the other person is not, or they're spending all the money. So the one person's earning the money, the other one's spending it. Or one person is a burden in terms of the resources of the family, right? So again, I want to juxtapose the Chris Watts case here. In the Chris Watts case, and I know some people will disagree, Chris Watts is the principal earner in that family, and he kept handing his paycheck to Shan'ann. Shan'ann was not only the dominant member of that couple, but she was dominating the finances. She would determine what would happen with the finances. And it was actually a disaster. They were about to lose their house, and she was totally caught up in multi-level marketing. And so they never had any money, right? Grammar Green, I think that's your first contribution, but thank you very much. Thanks a lot for that. I like that little guy flying there. And so you have, with the Chris Watts case, you have the passive entity in the family contributing a stable real income, but then having his money taken away from him and having the family in debt. And I can tell you that would cause me a lot of tension. If I was earning money and someone else was taking it, and the debt just never stopped, and the being housebroke just never stopped, that would be a source of tremendous tension for me, right? In the Morphew case, it seems like Barry was he had a job, but I'm not sure how much it earned, and I'm not sure how successful it was. There's a sense that Suzanne had inherited $500,000, or that she was somehow able to access a lot more money. And as a result, I think she was able to stay at home. So she didn't need to work. And so she's got access to all of this money, and Barry wants it, maybe for his work or whatever, because Barry's gotten them actually into a lot of debt. I would love to know whose idea it was to live as large as they decided to live in Colorado. That's another thing. Who decided on that property? Well, he's a landscaper. Who decided on what the house is going to look like? Well, he's the landscaper. Who made the decisions? Well, obviously the dominant person's going to make those decisions, but then someone else has got to live with that. Someone else has got to live with the mortgage, right? And so if that decision doesn't pan out, buying a house, buying a property, someone's got to pay the piper. And if the person didn't really want to go along with it to begin with, are they going to want to carry on doing that? And so when you have the passive personality holding the finances, I think that is a recipe for disaster. I'm not saying a passive person, I'm not at all saying that a passive person shouldn't have money. I'm saying if you have a passive person with money and the dominant person without, you're going to have a dynamic that's kind of that's kind of it's like a matter of time before something happens. The dominant person is going to need to figure something out, not just tell the passive person what to do, right? So the question I've got here is, did Suzanne not need to work? And if that's the case, didn't that isolate her? Didn't the fact that she didn't work kind of isolate her? Wouldn't it have been better probably if she did work? What I mean by that is, wouldn't it have been better for her if she'd been kind of involved in the community? Because Barry may have thought, if she's already isolated and she disappears, no one will miss her. Of course, if someone is working, even if it's a small job like, teaching a little bit here and there, and then she doesn't pitch up for work, someone is going to miss her. I think we also need to compare the Patrick Frazee case to this, which is where Kelsey Bereth's family had quite a lot of money. Patrick Frazee was the dominant personality, but he was struggling. He was in something like $72,000 debt at the time, and that principal, that amount was maturing at the time that Kelsey disappeared. There was also her work, health insurance stuff going on, life insurance as well. But you kind of had a reverse situation with Patrick Frazee, where Kelsey Bereth would drive a long way to Pueblo to work as a pilot, and Patrick Frazee would be home all the time because he kind of had to be there. He had to be on the ranch, but he was always at home, but he never had any money. But he's the dominant personality. So what happens? Well, the dominant personality, isn't he going to say, well, I don't want to live like this. I don't want to struggle. And here's this person that's right here by me. Why can't I just, if they're not going to give me the money, why can't I just take it? Right? The other thing with the finances is, at the time that this thing happened, the Morphew daughters were and are kind of going to college, and that's an additional expense, going to college. Who was going to pay for that? And what impact was the going to college going to have on all the other bills, such as paying for the mortgage, paying for the medical bills, and all of that kind of thing? Strawberry wine. I hope I can find your comment. Let me see if I can. Oh, here it is. Okay. Strawberry wine. Arrogance is the epitome of disasters. I mean, that's what Barry Morphew is all about. I wonder if he gambled. He probably did gamble in the sense of the work he was doing and how he expected it to pay off. And Timmy, just trying to find a comment that I quickly saw, but it seems to have disappeared. Strawberry wine. Barry took a wrong turn back when they lived in Indiana. Suzanne tried to save the marriage until it got out of hand. Okay. I think someone just made a contribution here. So I'm getting a bit. Anne J, thank you very much. Thanks a lot for that. Okay, so when you go from personality into the finances, you can see how personality can twist the finances and funnel them one way or the other, right? Then with finances, you have the additional thing going off into the Cancer, and that's the third dimension. So we're going from finances to Cancer. Now, I've got to tell you, I don't have an absolutely clear understanding of the Cancer. I know that I think she had the Cancer very young to begin with. So as a young woman, but then she got Cancer again, much older. I think she had leukemia, and then I think she had, quite sure what the other one was. I don't know the length of time that she had it. But the thing that I want to kind of address here is, okay, so she had lymphoma in high school. Yeah, I'm aware of that. But what happened after that? I mean, Barry did mention it in one of his posts that, she's beaten Cancer twice. If she's beaten it twice, was he worried that she might get it again? So I think the thing that I want to bring up with the Cancer, besides the financial part of it, is, again, to some extent, the personality. What happens if the passive person gets Cancer? The passive person who's already kind of passive is now bedridden and kind of out the way. What is going to happen then in a scenario like that? And I think a possibility is that the dominant controlling person is going to get an opportunity to find a new lease on life. So in other words, on the one hand, you might have unequal yoking in the sense that the person with Cancer is now literally a burden. But on the other hand, as everything is slowing down, you can imagine, if you take it literally, imagine two animals that are putting a yoke, and the one animal has Cancer and the one animal is struggling. The other animal, the stronger animal, walking slower, is going to have time to sort of look up and look around. He's going to have an opportunity to sort of cast his eyes across the field, right? And I think what the Cancer does is whatever unequal yoking there is, it intensifies it, right? So it's already in place. It's already part of that, as I said earlier, the process and the evolution that is in place. But now this is going to be a driving force for it, right? So on the one hand, it's a reminder, while you are a burden, a reminder, and you're a burden in terms of, we can't do this together, you're ruining my happily ever after, but also, where's our money going, right? Or even where's your money going that would normally come to me, or something like that. But it could also be an opportunity to give in to temptations and to think about things in a different way. like, people talk about life after death. What about life after Suzanne's death? But then she doesn't die, right? And I want to bring up something that again is kind of intertextual, but we're dealing with. Remember Patsy Ramsey in the John Benet Ramsey case? I've kind of done quite a lot of research on that recently, and I get a real visceral sense of that. I get a real visceral sense of the impact that cancer had on little children, on them bedwetting, and on the strain on housekeepers and everything. So no amount of money could really push that death aside and the entropy that was involved aside. But I think the part that I don't know if a lot of people think about is, if you think about John Ramsey, I think he's on to his third marriage now. So he's married to someone, then he married Patsy Ramsey, and then he is married a third person. I don't want to talk too much about this, but there has been some talk about infidelity related to John Ramsey in his backstory, I think before he even met Patsy, right? And I think it came up in Steve Thomas's book. I wish I had it in front of me, but I think the investigators wanted to check whether some lady, I think, contacted Geraldo, and it's not absolutely confirmed, but there's a sense that, and I think it was reported in the media speculated that was, while Patsy had cancer, was somebody having an affair. And as I say, this did catch on a little bit in the media, and I think it's mentioned to some extent in some of the books by the investigators. But I don't know if that is such a strange alien thought, is that your wife has cancer, and then if you think about it in a longish term way, she's often not home. She's when she is home, she's sort of only in one room. But what I'm trying to get at is the link between, the possible link between cancer and infidelity. And if you look at the Chris Watts case, it's almost like the pregnancy and infidelity. So in other words, when the yoking really manifests, right? When that feeling of the unequal yoking really manifests, that is when the temptation to have the affair kind of reaches a peak, right? So in the Chris Watts case, remember they were about to, they were thinking about getting a divorce, and then they decided to have a third child in order to kind of kickstart their marriage, right? But at that point, the yoking was kind of the worst, I think, for both of them. And then Shan'ann went to North Carolina, and at that point, that they were the most unequally yoked. They weren't even in the same state. Shan'ann was pregnant, and he was, so Shan'ann was stressed, and she was arguing about Nutgate, and all these things were happening. Meanwhile, Chris Watts was sort of ascending and coming into his own. That was at the moment of maximum unequal yoking that all of this happened, right? And so you've kind of got to ask, did something like that happen in the Morphew case? Did you have a scenario where Suzanne was, she had cancer, and someone wanted a new lease on life while that was happening? And think about it just in terms of death. Death is now knocking at your door. Don't you want to run away from it? I'm talking about it in a human sense. Someone is ill, they may be losing their hair. It's scary. I've in not a long period of time between now and some months ago, quite a few people I know have had elective surgery for cancer, have had certain things happen to them, and to the extent that just a few days ago, I went to the doctor, and I'm supposed to actually have myself tested for cancer. I'm quite scared. There's no, it's either going to be yes or no kind of thing. But what I'm trying to say is that fear of death can make you do certain things, whether it's someone next to you that is compromised, or a feeling that, well, I don't have, I'm not going to live forever. I better make the most of my life right now, kind of thing. There's quite a funny scene in Independence Day where, these big spaceships are kind of landing over the desert, and these two young teenagers, I think the boy says, we better do it because the world could end. It's that thing. It's actually a real thing. But in the Chris Watts case, there was also lupus. There's also lupus, which was in a way, I think, a bummer. It was something, not just Shan'ann, but the children as well were often sick. And so all of that is dragging you down. You want to live and, live your best life, but that sickness is dragging you down. And that is creating this unequal yoking. And so in Shanann's case, you had the dominant personality, also in a way the weaker person physically. The dominant personality is also the person who's often sick and probably anxious and to some extent OCD. Now in the Morphew case, you have a scenario where the passive personality gets cancer, and the dominant personality is still free to do whatever, but the dominant personality doesn't perhaps have the resources to do that. In other words, the dominant personality, his spouse is kind of caught, stuck in a way, and he can't cut himself loose because he doesn't have resources anyway. He needs to rely possibly on Suzanne for those. I would love to know things like the date that she supposedly inherited the $500,000. Does anyone know that? Duke said she'd already moved in his mind. So weird. I see messages here, and then they're not quite synced from the one screen to the other. And then I think you've also got to ask, just in terms of the entire dynamic, if you think about Barry and the children, remember that the girls are quite young as well, and they want to live their lives as well. And then what does cancer do to that? Does it create more bonding with the children? In other words, the parent that is the stronger parent, the parent that is the healthy parent, is there going to be more bonding with the children, with the two daughters, than with the other parent, right? And if you think about, again, the John Benet Ramsey case, I get the sense that John Benet and her mother bonded with the cancer, but I don't think Burke did. I think, you know what I'm saying? But that's a little girl. I don't know in a scenario when they're older what is likely to happen there. Okay, now we're going to go from, I wish I knew more about the cancer. I wish I knew exactly what it was, how long it lasted, and how much it cost, and all that kind of thing, and the things surrounding it. But we know, at least we know that it was a factor. Now we go to number 4, and we're about halfway through all of these things. Now we're going to deal with the house. And bear in mind, we're talking about being unequally yoked. I think one of the biggest, I've spoken about personality and finances, but I think one of the biggest, kind of most obvious manifestations of this is the house. I think you can look at any you can like drive down the road and you can look at any house and any couple in it and just ask yourself, what's going on there? Who bought this house? Who's designed the interior? Whose idea was this? And all that kind of thing. The house is going to give you a sense of, are these people living beyond their means? And who is footing the bill for all this? And is it kosher? Toggle Tran, thanks very much. Thanks a lot. When people are living beyond their means, that whole dynamic of unequally yoked gets much, much worse. So if you're living beyond your means, then keeping up these appearances is going to make, you can imagine two oxen pulling on a yoke, right? But they're pretending that they're both fine. The one that is weak is pretending they're not exhausted. The ox that is struggling is tapping onto his phone saying, look what a great day it is, and then walking some further. All of that just makes it worse, all of that kind of thing. So but the point I want to try and kind of emphasize with the Morphew house on Puma Path is that it feels masculine, doesn't it? The house itself feels like it's Barry's home. Don't you agree with that? Laurie says, enjoy what you have and who you are. I think one of the family members said that both, I'm not sure if it was her sister, said that both Barry and Suzanne hadn't quite reached that point where they were kind of happy with what they had. Didn't you get that sense that they were kind of still, I don't know if it's living beyond their means or trying to get to somewhere. Kimberly Faith, thank you very much. Wow. Have to run, but love your insight and your channel. Kimberly, I hope you're going to watch the rest when you've got some time. So again, if you look at the house, I would really love to have done a proper, I meant to do it in a certain video, but what I really wanted to do was show you the pictures of that house and step by step point out, look at this room, look at what's in the room, antlers, look at what's in this room, trees, look at what's in this room, that and that and that. And invariably it's the same theme. It's a theme of kind of like a hunting lodge. That's the sense I get. But all of it feels very masculine. It feels like Barry did 90% of the interior decorating in there. It's got quite a nice touch, but it also feels a bit hollow, doesn't it? It also feels a bit like it's missing, I don't want to say a woman's touch, but it's missing almost a sense of family. It's kind of the house itself feels a bit like a shell. It's difficult to explain exactly why. It's got a bit of a hotel feel to it or a hunting lodge feel to it. Do you see family photos anywhere? I don't know, it just seems, and you could say, well, the reason why it has that sort of vanilla aspect is that only just moved into it, that only just kind of gone there. Toggle says, to my views, the breadwinner can often become controlling in a marriage. That is why it is beneficial for women to be educated. Yeah, very good point. I think that is very, very true. And that is why I think there is the cliche that the traditionally in the, way back when, it's not a lot of personal touches, Stephanie. You get that traditional sense of the man being the breadwinner, and also he may not be the dominant personality in a kind of day-to-day sense. So if you're sitting at dinner, he may not be deciding what you're eating that day or whatever. He may not be the what do they call it? The life and soul of the party. How does that saying go? But he basically calls the shots. He decides what holidays you go on, what things can be bought, and he basically, the buck stops with him kind of thing. So I do think the house is a very good extension of Barry's personality. It shows someone who's hyper masculine. I think people might think, same with Chris Watts, yeah, he's a passive guy. No, he's very passive. Barry Morphew's masculine guy is a hunter. No, he's very masculine. He's very intense. He's a very tough hombre, right? He's a guy who he thinks of himself as tough, and that's his vibe, right? And his house is really a extension of that. Now, if you had to juxtapose the Morphew house with the Watts home, they couldn't be more different. The Watts home's got these sort of color-coded rooms and finicky little things here and there, and little decorated cushions, and I don't know, just it also just feels like it's been taken out of a box in a way. It feels there's something that feels a bit artificial about it as well. Whereas the Morphew home is very woody and very it's almost like a drum in a way. It's just got that sort of simple foresty vibe about it, doesn't it? Let's just read some of your comments here. Never thought of it that way. So something that I know some people didn't like the previous video I did, and there were certainly some people on Patreon who didn't like what I wrote about the political side to Barry Morphew. I've actually just lost my train. I've just lost my train of thought on that particular topic. I was trying to think what I was going to say with it. Yeah, I think it was just to do with the masculinity of the home. But yeah, I had something to say there, but it just gone out the back door. So in any way, the house seems to be Barry's idea. And I wonder whether Suzanne ever felt like it was home for her. I wonder whether Suzanne felt comfortable there. I think Barry was very happy there. He was in his element in a way. He was in like a hunting ground. He was in the woods, whereas Suzanne was not. Suzanne was away from all her friends. She wasn't teaching. And if you think about a kind, sweet person that is on their own, it's almost like that fairy tale of who's the girl who lets down all her hair, Rapunzel, or even Snow White. It's sort of the fairy, the princess who should be in her kingdom is instead kind of hidden away in the woods. Oh, that's what I meant to say. When I did the whole thing with the politics, and I just studied up on some of it, someone spoke about the refeudalization that is happening, which is an old system of going back to certain basic relationships between power structures. So, for example, and in any event, when I researched refeudalization, some of the pictures that came up were just obviously castles. And so you see the castle, and in the photos of this, you would see, what do you know if Barry's mother have anything to say about Barry being arrested? Barry also brought land to build his mama home, but sold the land back. No, I don't know. In fact, Barry's parents are a bit of a kind of an enigma here. I think we know a little bit about his father. We know that his father pushed him very hard, and he probably got a lot of his personality from his father, but possibly a bit of a sense of conflict about that as well. By the way, in the previous video I made, I said two men approached Morgan Gentile. As far as I know, the one person was a family member and the other one was a friend. And someone actually mentioned, I think, the friend's name in the comments. So So that's just some information there. And so anyway, in terms of this refeudalization, you have these images of the castle. And when you look at that, the Morphew residence, it looks like a castle in the middle of a forest. It's got a fairy tale quality to it, but also a dark fairy tale quality to it. It's this huge house, but it's like a castle, right? And we know something bad has happened there. The other thing with the refeudalization, it refers to these different layers of relationship, these kind of old feudal relationships with the peasants, with the knights, and with the nobles. So you have those three levels: royals, nobles, knights, and peasants. And if you think about Barry's work, so Barry's supposedly a royal, he's this baseball star, but he's working on the level of kind of a peasant. He's working as a landscaper. He's he even kind of criticized the people he was working with as, I think he called the one a meth head, but basically you have this mismatch between how he's living and how he's working. They kind of don't really go together. And so I think one of the biggest ways Suzanne felt that she was unequally yoked was with regard to the house. So in the same way that Chris Watts was like, I don't think Chris Watts wanted to be in that house, when he was having the affair when Shan'ann was in North Carolina. I don't think he ever slept in the house. It was like 5 weeks where he spent every night sleeping at his mistress's place. Camille, thanks very much. I'm late. I'm coming back to watch later. Tell Timmy I said hi. I will tell Timmy. Timmy's given up on getting my attention. He's running around here somewhere. He was an entrepreneur. But I do think that the house, in terms of the Chris Watts case, was a major way that he felt unequally yoked. He didn't want anything to do with it. I think whenever he walked in there, it was like he realized, I can't afford this. I don't want this. I've had enough of this kind of thing. And I wonder what Suzanne felt. Did she also feel like she's living in Barry's house? Did she also feel like she's living in kind of Barry's life? Did she also feel like, do you get what I'm saying? She's living in Barry's fairy tale and it's becoming a nightmare. Just as Chris Watts was living in Shanann's fairy tale and that was becoming a nightmare. And that brings us to the fifth point, which could really be the first point. It could really be one of the most important points, which is the religious side. Okay? And I brought it up before, but let me just re-emphasize it. Suzanne was genuine, honest, is he. Let me say that again. Not Shan'ann. Did I say Shan'ann? Suzanne was genuine and honest. Was he? And the video I've just put up before this one, where you, I don't think I played it in the audio clips that I played. I think you can hear it in the Fox 21 clip. You hear Barry defending himself against allegations that he's got mistresses and so on. And regardless of what he says, Nick, why are your mods deleting people who are not being rude and talking sense? I'm not sure who they deleted, but if people are kind of arguing with one another, then that's just not, you need to be here to talk about the case, not to tell everybody else what a terrible person X, Y, or Z is, right? It's just not necessary. So in any event, the impression we get is that she was genuine. And in that Fox 21 thing, I don't know if I have the impression that he's just if we're talking about someone who tells the truth, someone who's honest, someone who doesn't tell lies. Is he someone who tells the truth? When he did his sermon in the forest, was he convincing? One thing that I found interesting is that he does say, I love you, I think right at the end, although he says it, his voice is quite soft at that point. It's not particularly convincing. You can see he's quite an intense character, but he does say, I love you, which Chris Watts never did. Chris Watts never said something about, certainly not in that way. I'm not sure if Chris Watts, he never mentioned Shan'ann being pregnant. I'm not sure if he ever said, I think he said something like the girls are my life, but I don't think he ever said, I love my children. I don't think he said that. I don't think he said, I love my wife. And you sort of think, well, wasn't that because he knew his girlfriend was watching and she would want to know if he still loved his wife? And then you take that into the Morphew case and you wonder, well, was there a mistress and was she watching? Or were there lots of mistresses? What is going on with that? Or would only the people on his Facebook see that? You know, there are different ways to think about it. I do think in terms of religion, and it's, I think, a very private area that Suzanne would know about, her family would know about, and her friends would know about. I do think that that was probably, for her, probably a major area where she felt that they were unequally yoked. In other words, he doesn't genuinely believe what I believe. And I think the cancer probably brought her a lot closer to God. She probably credited God for saving her, right? And that is exactly what happened with Patsy. Patsy's faith grew stronger. In fact, John's faith also seemed to get stronger. And I think part of that was due to the cancer. But it's not necessarily going to be like that. What if when her religious faith was getting stronger, his was becoming weaker in truth? I mean, you know, like he may, you know, do all the things he needs to do, go to church, but what is actually going on in his heart? And so I wonder what you guys think about that. It's more that you know death is coming. You know death is coming and you're getting close to God. Okay, so that's certainly an area that I would really like to get to know better, the religious aspect, but that does tend to be something that family are quite private about. But I would certainly be interested to know more on that particular area. And then we've got two left. The next one is social status. Think about unequally yoked in terms of this idea of social status. So where did Barry and Suzanne fit in that particular area? What do you guys think? So just in a very basic way, Barry was like a legend, right? And Suzanne was sort of, you see her as nice and kind. Barry's a landscaper, Suzanne was a kind of a school teacher. But basically, Barry's claim to fame is the sort of machismo, the baseball star, who then is also kind of like this hunter and kind of man's man. And somebody said, I don't know if it's true, but somebody said that Barry got a lot of jobs in Indiana that they should have been tendering or bidding for. There should have been kind of like a fair process, but somebody favored him. And I think that is quite a common thing in certain communities where, someone comes out of high school or whatever, and then they're a legend, and then everyone wants to deal with them because they want to be part of that group. They still want to be the cool kids of high school, whatever it is. But I think in a very basic way, and again, this is to do with personality, Barry would have imagined himself still as that legend so many decades later and thought of himself in that way. But of course, he's not. He's just an ordinary dude. He's a landscaper. What happened when he was a legend was when he was at school. It doesn't really apply anymore. But the important thing is that Barry thinks that, right? Now, if you take the Chris Watts case and you look at their social status, that's quite a crazy case, because you could argue that Shan'ann Watts had incredible social status. She had, but all on social media. So Shan'ann and her husband, but let's just say Shan'ann was technically bankrupt, didn't really own the home they were living in, didn't really own the car, didn't really own anything, but had a lot of social influence. And then you could further say, well, but was that social status real if it's multi-level marketing? If your entire social network is multi-level marketers, is that real, right? I just think it's an interesting concept, though, because the important thing to address here is who was it real to? And in this case, it was real to Chris Watts. Do you get what I'm saying? So whether you say multi-level marketing, social media, whatever, Shan'ann had social status, and the person who recognized that was her husband, right? There's some other elements to talk about there, such as some of the real relationships they had and things like that. Teresa, Scott Peterson had dreams in professional golf, absolutely. Chris Watts had dreams of joining the NASCAR, right? The NASCAR circuit. Scott Peterson was still playing golf right up until when he kind of was arrested. In fact, I think that was part of his alibi. When they sort of went to actually fetch him, I think he was driving his mother's or somebody's, like a burgundy Mercedes-Benz. He was just sort of around about a golf course, right? But the impression you kind of get is a golden boy who never grew up. Don't you agree? With Chris Watts, with Scott Peterson, and with Barry Morphew, is that they were golden boys in the eyes of their peers, and particularly their parents. I'm not quite sure about Barry Morphew's parents, but certainly their peers. And then I think it reflects back, and then someone like Scott Peterson thinks, you know what, I should be a golfer, or that's the kind of life I want. And then when his life tends to be quite boring and he's kind of in the doldrums, he's selling fertilizer and he's getting nowhere, there's a part of him that pines for this other life that he thinks he deserved and is owed, and it's the fairy tale that he's been denied. And who's in his way, in his mind? His wife. What does he need to get back? Well, he probably needs money. And what's he going to do with that money? Well, he's going to sign up to a particular golf course, and that is actually what he did. He signed up to quite an expensive links thing. I call it post-meditation, and I've mentioned it in front of some very experienced lawyers, and they scoff, but it's a true crime rocket science-ism. And I say, when you have pre-meditation, you have post-meditation. And post-meditation is simply all the thinking that links to the pre-meditation, kind of in a criminal sense, but following after the crime. And so the post-meditation, for example, could be something like, let's say in the Chris Watts case, if He wasn't caught, he would have sold the house. Selling the house was part of his premeditation. We know that was happening right up until the time the bodies were disposed of, but it's also part of the post-meditation. Ditto the Morphew case. And I think you've got to think about this quite carefully. Barry builds his dream home, and then there's no one telling him you can't sell it or do it this way or do it that way. Barry ends up selling the house. Why? He sells the house for, I've seen three numbers, 1.6, 1.7, 1.5 million dollars. Barry sells the house, he decides to sell it. Why? Why go to Colorado, buy a house or build a house and then sell it? This dream house. And I think the answer is obvious, because they couldn't afford it. And he didn't want to share the money. And some people have said the word greed here. I think that's a good word, and I think it goes beyond just money. I think money is a big part of it, but it also goes into greed for other things besides money. Someone talked about he donated it to the foundation. Someone said, did he move her there to kill her? That's a bit of a stretch. A video I want to do, and I need to think about it a bit more, but is when did the premeditation start? And there are two layers to that. The one layer is the long arc, the long story. So with Chris Watts, you would say, the fact that there were problems with Shan'ann dating back to their wedding day, right? Tiffy Richardson, thanks very much. Really appreciate that. We love your channel and your coverage. Thanks, Tiffy. That's the long thing. And then you have the shorter thing, the shorter layer, which is what are the events precipitating it, right? So you have those two layers. And that definitely requires, you really need something like a phone data review to speak intelligently about it. But coming back to the social status, I think, and you get a sense of this from some of the social media, that Barry, because of his personality, because of his background, he perceived himself to be of a certain status, and couldn't that be why he maybe felt he deserved an affair, or he'd kind of done that before? I don't mean he'd had affairs before. I just mean he had a girl on his arm constantly, and now that his social status was kind of diminishing through just the passage of time. What do you guys think about that? Now, I've written down here, and I think this is a fantastic question to ask when you're talking about being unequally yoked. Who do you think was having an affair? Right? Martin says, did he have an affair? Well, that we don't know for sure. There's rumors at this point. But let me ask that question again. Who was having an affair? Who was more likely to be having an affair, right? And you really get a sense of how complicated this gets, the dynamics and the permutations, when you look at passive dominating personality, and then you look at the Chris Watts case, where a passive person had the affair in that case. Someone kind of ran after him, but the passive person had the affair. In terms of the social, think about the social status and the thing of having an affair. What is going on in a situation like that? Are you getting a boost to your your own perceived social status by having the affair. What do you think is going on? Mr. Business was, okay. Suzanne seems loyal and passive, yes. So some people have thought that, did Shan'ann Watts have an affair because she was quite a go-getter? And it doesn't look that way. It looks as though Shan'ann was actually very invested in her family. So if Barry was having an affair, what does that say about social status? And also, what does it say about where he was at that time? What do you think? And the other question I think that is quite interesting to ask is, if he was having multiple affairs, what is going on there? What is that saying about this former baseball star, if that's true? And what I think it could be saying is that he also had a sense of being unequally yoked. That maybe he didn't want to be in the situation that he was in, that he wanted a kind of happily ever after the way that he saw it, right? And so I think the main way that you can be unequally yoked is you embark on a fairy tale, and when you look again, it's no longer your fairy tale, somebody else's, and you don't want to be part of it. It's almost like two oxen pulling a plow, and the one ox is thinking that would be quite a good route to go. You know, if we take this route, we're going to miss that stone and we'll dodge that tree. And I'm quite happy with this route. This is going to be quite a good route for me. But the other ox is thinking, you know what? I struggle a bit with uphills or whatever. I need to go more that way. And so each one has it's not really a fairy tale, but each one has a path in his mind or her mind for where they want to go. And they're totally different. And as that path diverges, as the path goes further and further away from the path you want to be on, that unequal yoking gets worse and worse and worse. Because for the one, the further they get from their path, the worse it's going to be for them. Plus, it's that knowledge of, I don't want to be here, right? Suzanne was interested with surviving and looking after her children and husband. I don't think Barry was having an affair while Suzanne was alive. Martin, you could be right, but I think you've got to ask yourself, why was a murder committed if nothing else happened? So if there wasn't an affair, then why was murder necessary? I think I saw Morena Murray. I personally don't believe that humans are made to only have one partner for life. Maybe that's what Barry thought as well. So Fanola says, I don't think either of them were having an affair. So I'm just gonna be honest with you guys. When I look at the footage of Morgan Gentile, I see Nicole Kissinger. I see someone who is kind of a breath of fresh air. I'm not talking about, I don't know her. There's very little footage there. I'm just speaking from a man's perspective. I look at her and she seems, she's quite interesting to listen to and to look at. And I can't help wondering what Barry thought about her. I think she must have been fun to work with, but what more than that? And if you look at a lot of the things in that, they spent a lot of time together by her own admission. She seems quite a lot younger than Suzanne. And just that, they spent a lot of time together and she was a lot younger, I think is definitely quite an interesting thing. The fact that the CBI spoke to her as often as they did, I think is quite interesting. She also refused to take a polygraph, and so I think that definitely is an interesting aspect. But then there's also the Daily Mail who took those other photos. People have said that's a family member, but I don't know if the journalist would have gotten that wrong. Maybe he did. there's also other people that have been mentioned, and it just seems like a lot of rumors to be based on nothing. Usually if rumors don't go anywhere, they just stop. But I guess that might be something that is mentioned in the affidavit, who knows. What I found with Morgan Gentile's, I'm just talking about just looking at her and, putting the sound off even, is she seemed quite, not happy, but she seemed quite like it was a joke in a way, or she seemed quite amused or bemused by what was going on. Now, bear in mind, she was kind of at the heart of something at the time that someone lost her life. Gigi Jardine, you are amazing. Okay, thanks a lot. At the time that this happened, she was right there. It doesn't mean that it's a smoking gun or anything. It just is interesting, and I don't think that if you think in certain directions, I don't think that's paranoia or jumping to conclusions. I think, given what we know in other crimes, certainly we need to be able to exclude certain people. And so something like a polygraph would really be good in order to exclude someone. Again, I just want to bring it back to social status. What do you think Barry's social status was? And I kind of left a bit of a snarky comment on YouTube somewhere where someone said, a man won't cheat on with a more attractive woman, they'll cheat with a less attractive woman. And I just said, that actually doesn't make any sense, because it doesn't necessarily mean she's more physically beautiful. More attractive simply means more desirable, and it could mean more beautiful, but it could also mean because of her personality and her appearance and certain other things, she's more desirable. Attractive doesn't mean beautiful, but it can, if that makes sense. So do you think Barry felt like his social status needed reinforcement? What do you guys think about that? Do you think Barry felt inadequate in terms of his social status? Do you think Suzanne did? Okay, and so I'm not going to take the social status any further, but I do think that is a interesting element to the unequally yoked argument. Now we come to the very last one, and there's the little post-it, and that is dealing with Suzanne being isolated. Okay, and once again, I'm going to just take the whole thing into the Chris Watts case. Now, think about to what extent Chris Watts was isolated in a way that actually suited him. He was left at home for 5 weeks, and what did he do with that? He realized he wasn't happily married. He realized he didn't want to live in that house anymore. He made all sorts of decisions based on their 5 weeks apart. He didn't want to live in the house. He wanted to move. Didn't want the child anymore, even though that was his decision. But that isolation kind of made him realize to what extent he'd been alone in his marriage anyway, right? Now, who is the isolated person in the Morphew equation? What do you guys think? If you think about it in a very basic way, and I don't know the answers to, like, I don't know where Barry's family were living. I'm talking about his immediate and other family. I don't know whether were they in Colorado, but in terms of Suzanne, it feels like her entire family weren't in Colorado. I don't have the information to be able to say what the situation was with Barry, but I get the sense that just in terms of her family, Suzanne was very isolated. So all her family were somewhere else, and we know what happened to her. Same with Shan'ann Watts. Shan'ann was quite isolated in terms of all of her family members lived in North Carolina, and look what happened to her. I think Chris Watts underestimated how close some of her multi-level marketing friends were to her, like Nicole Atkinson. But just look at what we're talking about. Suzanne, isolated, look at what happened to her. Shan'ann, isolated, look at what happened to her. Kelsey Bereth, isolated, look at what happened to her. With Kelsey Bereth, she also moved from, I think, was it California, to Woodland Park. And then when she disappeared, there was no family really to find her in the area. They did come there about 11 days later. What I'm trying to emphasize here is you can also have that unequal yoking, where one of you has got a support system in a particular area and the other doesn't. And so I think that is a factor. What do you guys think? Never move to Colorado, too isolating if no family there. You can take it even further. You know, if you look at so many of these crimes, the Ramseys moved to Colorado. The Ramseys moved from Atlanta to Boulder, Colorado, and then I think it was 4 or 5 years after that disaster struck. Kelsey Bereth moved to Colorado. The Watts family moved to Colorado. They didn't grow up there, they moved there, right? Quite interesting. I believe Suzanne confronted Barry about a separation and or wanting to move home to Indiana. Both girls were graduating college and high school. Yeah, I think that's a good point, Rhonda. I don't know whether you think that Barry just snapped, whether you think that there was one confrontation. I think there were probably many. I think there were probably many confrontations, and never thought of it that way. Excellent. Thanks, Gil. Stephanie, I was engaged to someone who wanted me to move with him away from my family and my roots. That was a deal breaker for me. He admitted he was selfish, and if I wanted to be with him, I had to follow him. Nan says, something is going on with Colorado and marriage. I would love to know, I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of people who moved there and lived happily ever after. We hear about the people who haven't, who've moved there and not lived happily ever after, but I'm sure there are some that have. Heavenly Clouds says to Ken Dalton, I think being single is not bad at all. It takes one person to complement your life and one person to make it like hell. Some of you here might not like what I'm about to say, but the philosophy of Donald Trump was America first, right? America first. Do you think that concept, just that idea, put yourself first or us first, can have a application? I think I'm quite tense just bringing this up. Can have an application in this case, meaning could Barry Morphew have, not directly, I'm just saying that psychology of putting myself first, isn't that what Chris Watts did as well? It's a psychology of me first, and it's selfish, isn't it? I mean, you might say it's not selfish, it's actually normal, or it's how can I put it? It's natural or something like that. But what do you think in terms of a marriage that's not working out, where you say, well, me first, where can that go? And of course, there have got to be other elements. I think there are lots of marriages where someone feels like me first, and I'm not happy with this marriage, and people don't die. So that is one of the big ways you test this particular marriage and the unequal yoking, is you say, it can't be the same as any other marriage. So what's different? One thing that's very different is Barry's superstar status as a baseball star. That obviously went to his head. One thing that's very different is his intensity. So a lot of the unequal yoking is all wrapped up in the personality dynamic and the personality mismatch. Same in Chris Watt's case. And that happens to be the hardest thing to unravel. That's the hardest part, because basically, who is this person? Who is that person? What impact did their respective personalities have on one another? And I mean, that's what we're all trying to find out, and that's what we don't know. Some of that information, I think, is hidden. Some of that information, I think, is just things family members know, and they don't know they know, or family members know and just because they want to keep private. Well, it's going to be difficult to figure that stuff out. You do figure it out in a narrative is when you start getting all the information together, and then you see, wow, if I was in that situation, I would feel a lot of pressure, or I would feel this, or I would feel that. And then as these processes accumulate, you can see the tensions start to take effect. And when you truly understand a true crime case, when you truly, truly understand it, you truly understand the people involved, you start to see there's no way that this could have ended any differently. Let me say that again. When you truly understand the people and the circumstances involved, you truly follow it, you know the minutiae, you know the details, you know the bigger things that are going on, and you look at what is happening, you tend to get a sense of inevitability about it, that this was kind of the likeliest outcome. And you really get a sense of that with the Chris Watts case when you follow those messages and you know the kind of person he is, and you know how Shan'ann responds. You can see where he's going in his mind. You think, well, there's no other outcome. And that's quite a big jump from a lot of other people saying, how did this happen? I don't understand. Where you say, given who he was, given what is going on, it was inevitable. And that kind of thing scares the crap out of me, because you sometimes kind of confronted when you putting these narratives together, you kind of confronted with this idea, what if I'm caught in something like that? What if I'm caught in something that is an inevitable conclusion for me, right? What if I'm unequally yoked and I'm caught up in something that's got a inevitable result? How do I get out of that? And the answer is, well, you need to escape your own mindset. That's something you could have told Chris Watts. That's also something you could have told Shan'ann. That's something you can tell anyone who's in an unhappy marriage, but they refuse to leave it. Find a way out of your mindset. Just find a way to thinking your own thoughts, but thinking differently about how you're thinking about things. Because what if you are on this inevitable road, and if you could see into the future, you wouldn't want to be going where you're going to end up, right? Teresa says nothing is inevitable. We all have choices, however scary they might seem at first. I know that it seems like that on, like, if we're talking hypothetically, you might say, no, we've got a choice, but certain personality things are fairly, they're going to channel behavior in a certain direction. And when you study true crime as long as I have, you look at certain cases like Henry von Bredau, Oscar Pistorius, and so on. I'm just trying to think of others where that is so strong. But you do get a sense that this was inevitable. And that's quite scary. Definitely is quite scary. You might say, people have a choice, just change your mind. But what if somebody said to you that you need to change your vote? If your vote could change the course of American history, just change your vote. It's your choice, just change it. you probably wouldn't, because you'd say, well, I'm not convinced. So when you say it's just a choice, it is just a choice, but we are who we are for a lot of reasons that go into our backstories and in feedback loops that aren't easily changed. And just on that subject, I've someone sent me a thing about, can science help justice or something like that, and they were saying for a long time people thought of themselves as rational. For a long time, with all of the knowledge that we've gained over hundreds of years, even up until recently, people thought that we are actually very rational creatures. We make decisions. We are sentient. We're intelligent creatures, but actually we're not. We make a lot of decisions that are wrong. We make a lot of decisions that we think are well informed, and they're not. They've done tests to establish people's accuracy on certain things, and they've found staggeringly how easily people are susceptible to bias. So you might have a situation where a whole bunch of people are in a room together, and one person or a few people haven't been informed about what's going on, and then they bring in consensus with another part of the group, and they say, everyone in this group say that this glass of water has got a salty taste, and then everybody says that, and then the person who knows that it's not also says it is, because that's what's going on. There's a lot of things like that going on, which is tested. They've done case studies of it, and they're just shocked at how people are susceptible to social bias. You see it constantly. And I see it constantly in a way that scares me, where you try to communicate with someone, and I'm a communicator, I write books. You try to communicate with someone, you tell them what you're going to do, you tell them what is happening, and then when it happens, they're still surprised. You tell someone, what needs to be done, and then they're still caught off guard. You just wonder, and I understand that people aren't just rational beings, they're emotional beings. But that emotion then clouds your ability to think logically and rationally. And that means there's a loophole and a weakness in all of us, which can be taken advantage of if you know what you're doing, if you've got algorithms, and if you organize in whatever you're trying to bring about, right? Wasn't that the Milgram experiment? It could be. I'd like to speak more practically and using examples, but it's stuff off the top of my head. Her illness was a burden for him. Okay, so basically, in terms of the unequally yoked, first of all, I've said yes, they were. I would say they were not as unequally yoked as the Watts family, and the reason I say that is because their marriage lasted much longer, right? Also because they were kind of similarly kind of educated and employed and from similar backgrounds. So you had them both being from Indiana, and also she was a teacher and he was a landscaper. It's kind of the same thing. You kind of get the sense that she was also kind of outdoorsy and that kind of thing. But the fact that the marriage lasted as long as it did gave me a sense that the unequal yoking was worse in the Watts family, just because I think Shan'ann was a lot more controlling, and Watts was a lot more passive than these respective personalities. That's my opinion. Bear in mind also what Chris Watts did was far, in terms of scope, was far worse. He wiped out his whole family. Barry's accused of killing his wife. So the scale of an unequal yoking, I believe, is much, much worse in the Watts family. The Morphews look well matched. Good point. I think they do look quite well matched. to me, they've got kind of a movie star look about them in a way, especially when they were younger. I actually thought that Chris Watts and Nicole Kessinger looked quite well matched at the time. There are certainly times where Chris Watts and Shan'ann look well matched, but certainly at the time that they were at the Great Sand Dunes, I thought they looked like a nice couple. Unfortunately, when you know what is going on in the background, well, it shouldn't have happened. Okay, so we're on about the 2-hour mark. I just want to thank everyone for participating. I want to thank Stephanie for moderating on a Saturday. I'm not sure if I'm going to be here tomorrow. There was something I wanted to talk about on the Chris Watts case, but I'm not sure if I'm going to be here tomorrow. We'll see. If a lot of you want me to be here tomorrow, then maybe I will be, but we'll see. Thank you to those who've contributed, both in terms of your comments and also your contributions. On Patreon, I'm uploading chapters on the Everest tragedy. The Everest tragedy. It's called Everest, from the 1996 Everest disaster, and also doing a series on the Ripper investigation, as well as John Benet Ramsey and also Laurie Vallow. What I find very interesting with the Laurie Vallow case is there's some overlap between that case and this case in certain ways. And there's certain areas that are a little bit difficult to go into, but this is a true crime channel, so I'm going to have to suck it up. And if some people are sensitive about certain... The whole idea is that through these discussions that we have, such as religion and politics or whatever, we get to know these people. And through getting to know these people, we get to understand one another, not necessarily ourselves so much, but we get to understand other people within these systems of whether it's religion or whatever it is. Do you know what I'm saying? And so that is the value of it. That is the value of these cases, right? And so that is really what we want to do, and not get caught up in disagreeing with one another and taking pot shots at one another. We want to get a sense of where we are as a society, and then find our place again as individuals. And perhaps some of these systems and some of our attitudes need to change. Perhaps that is why some of these crimes happened. You do get the sense that either people are too caught up in money, or they're too terrified of the process of divorce. And so somehow that needs to change. I don't know. Maybe divorce needs to be just more acceptable, or cheating needs to be, I don't know. In France, you can have an affair and it's no big deal. It's like a European thing. It sounds horrible, but it's better than certain other things happening. Anne Lane, we need a prayer group and focus groups for getting Suzanne to tell us where she is. Teresa, thank you. Sorry, Timmy's not around here to say bye. Timmy, come. Timmy, see if he comes running. Timmy, come. I hear him. Come, Timmy. Maybe he's not coming. Timmy. Cass, yes, agree. Your insights are very good, thought-provoking and helpful. I hope this was comparable to my Unequally Yoked on Shan'ann and Chris, but bear in mind we don't have that big window of social media in this case. We just don't have that. Justine Brown, you're statistically more likely to suffer violence when you're not married. I've also heard that single men tend to live not as long as people who are married. So it just shows you there is some nurturing and other value in long-term relationships. You can build something. Oh, I thought it was better. That's good to hear. There was a little bit of pressure on me, I felt, based on what some people were saying. Heavenly Cloud says, what is your newest book? I'm supposed to be writing, what's the name again? Cult Figure on Laurie Vallow. But at this point, I'm purposefully not. I want to not write a book for a while. So if I can get through this year not writing a book, I'll be glad. I'm keeping my writing polished by writing a Patreon post here and there, and writing on Patreon. But I don't have writer's block. I'm trying to get healthy and strong in my body, and I want to be just a bit more balanced, because I was writing constantly and everything was like in my mind. And so I want to kind of be more physical and more balanced and more social. And, after writing as many books as I have, I need to bring that part back. And when I'm happy that it's where I want it to be, and it's however long it takes, then I'll go back to writing again. If I do write books again, I probably will, but let's just say if I do write books again, they'll probably be shorter books, like 25,000 words or so. I've just noticed people's attention spans are quite short anyway, and I think it's still quite a lot of writing. But so that's probably what I'm thinking about doing. That all of that can change very quickly. If an incredible story comes along, who knows, I could get transported with it, and if I'm on top of it, who knows. I do want to write Cult Figure. There's so many books I've half written that I want to finish. I guess I want to get this YouTube channel properly up and running, maybe up to 50,000 subscribers. Maybe once I reach that milestone, then I can relax a little bit and take a bit of time out and write. So maybe that's the milestone. Say 50,000 subscribers on YouTube, and then I'll probably give that a rest a little bit, and then maybe write another book. I want to write Way to the World on the Scott Peterson trial, not only the original trial, but the trial that's happening now. I want to write a book on Durst, Robert Durst. I think it's already got a title, Entitlement. I've already half written the third book on Casey Anthony. It's the third treachery book. It's half finished. I was actually writing that when the Chris Watts case happened. There's another Amanda Knox book I want to write called The Ivorian. There's a fourth book on Mount Everest I want to do on the Sherpas. So it's a lot of work that I want to do, but I've got one lifetime. I wish there were more of me, but it just isn't. There are a lot of Chris Watts books. I'm pretty sure I'm done with that. I think I've written all that I feel I want to say on the Chris Watts case, especially in Post-Truth. That book was a hard book to write, but I'm pretty happy with it, and I'm pretty happy that was my last effort. I also wanted to write a second book on Vincent van Gogh, but people just weren't that interested in it, which to me was sad, because I did follow in his footsteps. Meaning I went to France, and I really got caught up in that, and I really enjoyed it, and I was tempted to do it anyway. Like if you don't make any money, if it's a disaster in the business sense, write it anyway. I'd like to be in that position, but I'm not sure if I am. Maybe in 10 or 20 years I'll write books that nobody buys and be happy with that. Barry Morphew is trapped inside himself. So busy. When you guys start kind of nagging me and asking me, aren't you going to write a book about this? I do notice it, and who knows, I might respond to it. But I'm at a place now where I want to go on a different journey. I call it the fitness narrative. And we'll see how long that lasts. We're going through winter now, which is a difficult time to do that, but we'll see. I have thought about writing a book on the Morphew case, but I feel like I need more. Excuse the pun. Also want to talk about, someone here mentioned the cadaver dogs. Anne Lane, cadaver dogs hit several areas. I want to talk a little bit about that. I'm not kind of convinced. What did someone say here? How do we join membership if you have 99 cents? I can join, or $1.99. Well, you can join Patreon for $1 a month or $2 a month. The best value, I think, is about $5 because you get all the content plus audiobooks. I'd love to see another Van Gogh book of yours. Yeah, I'd love to write another Van Gogh book. I love what Stephanie says here, you changed history for me. I mean, I feel like that as well. When I was having dinner with these mountain bikers, I said, I think my best contribution to the true crime genre is the murder of Vincent van Gogh, and I think most people don't know about it. I'm probably not going to be a legend in my own time or ever. We'll see. I love the Van Gogh series. You know what, Gigi, I would love to do more on the letters. I ordered a book and I've got a book, and I'd love to do the letters, say, between 1886 and 1887. I just find it really, really interesting. It's like living in a different time through these real letters that come almost every day. Thanks, Stephanie. Okay, so it's about 2 hours, 11 minutes. I think I need to be out of here. I see some messages coming through on my phone. Thanks everyone for being here. A really nice group. Thank you for being civil and well-mannered. Stephanie, thanks very much for holding the fort. And Teresa says, guess more I need to read now. Things I didn't know that I didn't know, for sure. How do you know what you do? How do you know things that you don't know you don't know? That's one of the riddles with true crime as well. One of the things you should know you don't know is the family dynamic. And that's the holy grail of the Morphew case. What was the relationship between each different family member? Barry and this daughter, Barry and that daughter, Barry and the mother, this daughter and the mother, this daughter and that daughter, this daughter and the father, and all of that kind of thing. And was some outsider having an impact on that? Was some outside influence, not a person, but a belief having an impact, and so on and so on and so on. Okay, guys, stay healthy. Reading the New Testament is great. Try reading the book of John. Okay, guys, thanks for being here, and I'll see you guys next time. Ciao.